tremendous partnership with whom we've had a tremendous partnership in building and delivering these additional Garmin guided visuals to aircraft owners and operators for you. So Chris has got a terrific depth and background and experience. I'll let him describe a little bit about that to you, but and you'll see the depth and tremendous amount of depth that he's got here and what it takes to design these procedures is terrific. So we'll talk a little bit about the procedure design overall. We'll let Chris start there, and then we'll talk about a scenario from a recent citation jet pilot member that had posted on the forum going into Scottsdale, and what that was like using Garmin's guided visuals. And then we'll talk about how we get the Garmin guided visuals into your avionics and get all that set up. And then with that time left over, we'll take questions. So with that, Chris, I'll hand it over to you if you would like to add any more on your background and get us started with some depth on how these procedures are created.
Well, thanks, Joey, and thank you, Liz and Rob, and all of you for having me. It speaks volumes of your professionalism when you take time out of your busy day to listen to anything to do with safety and how we can do things differently. You can look at my bio slide, and all that tells you is I was a product of government overspending during the 1980s. My first type rating was in a citation. I flew the CE 501 and the 500, and I flew it for U.S. Customs. Unfortunately, though, currently I'm flying a TBM, so I'm not part of your group, but very much interested in supporting it. If you go to the next slide. So what are the genesis of where we got to with unstabilized approaches and wrong surface landings? They've been around for a while, and quite frankly, until we got FOQA, flight operation quality analysis tools, like back when I flew 727s and MD-80s, DC-9s, nobody knew how bad we flew because there was no data for it. So if you had an unstabilized approach when you sat there in the chocks, or like when I was in the military where you had a big sweaty head with helmet rings around it, like, wow, I'll never do that again. Well, with FOQA data, we started seeing trends. And what we learned is what's on this slide is if you have an unstabilized approach, there is a very high probability you're going to have an accident or an incident, a hard landing. You're going to depart the paved surface. And just look at how many wrong surface landings. And wrong surface landings are landing on the wrong runway, landing at the wrong airport, not landing on the runway, but landing on a taxiway. So one of the things that I worked on, if you want to go to the next slide, was to come up with a way that we could fix this and in a deliberative fashion that pilots could accept and work with. So the FAA recognizes that these unstabilized approaches cause accidents. FOQA data confirms whether we're doing a good job or not. And what we found is that certain runways tend to be tough for everybody. Sometimes you'll have a pilot that should go around and doesn't. Or you have a runway that's just really hard and it's not so much even going around. It's like, how do I get to it? So go to the next slide. This is actually taken in my aircraft, and this is a guided visual approach. And this goes into Grand Prairie. And oftentimes I find myself going into Grand Prairie and I file and fly IFR from Houston up there. And then they will give me a visual approach landing to the south before I enter Fort Worth's traffic pattern. And they'll go to the next slide. And they'll want you to call the runway in sight so they can get you there, but it's not easy to pick it out. So this all stemmed from about 20 plus years ago. I worked on a project to create the first RNAV visual flight procedures, or RVFPs. And we had a real problem with runway 29 at Newark. And the problem was that we had pilots that either overshot the turn, undershot the turn, were too high, were too fast. It was tricky because it was trajectory based. And it wasn't something where there was an ILS or something else that could back them up. So I went to the FAA and said, what if we coded this and put it into the flight management system and the pilot could fly the Magenta line and we could give them lateral and vertical guidance? And initially the FAA was like, I don't know. We don't know if we like that idea. And I worked on it and I worked on it and I worked with somebody in the RNAV office back when they had one and the tower chief in Newark. And we co-authored this notice that's in front of you, this 8900 series that brought the RVFP to life. And the first one was runway 29 at Newark. And what I will tell you is the off-the-hook FOQA data evaporated as soon as we started using this. We no longer had unstabilized approaches, wrong surface landings. This did an amazing job. It's not an instrument approach, but it's lateral and vertical guidance that will take you to the touchdown zone. And if you're curious what the diagram to the right is PDAR's data. That's a bunch of tracks of different aircraft going to that runway, illustrating where aircraft are turning, not all in the same spot. And it's very subjective when you're using the Mark 1 eyeball as opposed to using data. The other benefit in this is you can use the autopilot. And that allows you to look outside and look for other traffic. So you're not consumed, especially in single pilot operations, with trying to fly the aircraft, navigate the aircraft, look for traffic, look for managing your energy. This allows you to better balance that workload and use the appropriate level of automation for the situation. We can go to the next slide. So how is it made? People say, how is the sausage made? Well, AOPA did a really nice article about it called How It's Made, where Hughes built instrument flight procedures into Merrill Field in Anchorage. And it talks about how that's done and what the process looks like. Next slide, please. Oh, and if anybody's going to be attending the NASAO conference, I think it's next week in Washington, please stop by and introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you in person. Next slide. So when we design instrument approaches, and this is again not an instrument approach, but we look at obstacles and we evaluate obstacles. Now, the FAA maintains a database of obstacles and they categorize them from 1A to 9I. 1A means they know where it is within 20 feet and 10 feet of height. 9I means that they're not even sure if it's still there. But when you have an obstacle like that, it blocks out a lot of airspace. So what we do when we don't know where obstacles are is we go boots on the ground and we reevaluate them for the FAA and we update their database, as that's one of the letters of authority that Hughes has to perform that work for the FAA. So obstacles play into the design of not just instrument flight procedures, but even guided visuals. Next slide. So in my example, you looking at this red cone, and we want to put a waypoint there. And this is why you'll find instrument flight procedures that are kind of wonky, where you're really high, and then all of a sudden you have to dive to get, to the ground. Because there's a waypoint, but because of an inaccurate obstacle, it blocks out a ton of airspace. And that's sort of an example there of what that would look like and why we go out and resurvey them. Now, with guided visuals, it's not the same because it's a visual procedure flown in VMC conditions. And obviously, if you saw something in front of you, you wouldn't fly into it, you would turn away from it. But this also has a role in guided visuals. Next slide. So when we design the procedure, we pull the 5010, which is the record for the airport. We look at the runways. We look at all of the data that's available. And then we put this into software and we model it. Next slide. Then we can also run simulations in software to see how the procedure performs. Next slide. In some cases, we'll look at it in a simulator. In some cases, we'll fly it in the aircraft. In terms of guided visual, it's looked at in simulation. Same thing with RVFPs. Those don't require a flight inspection. When we build instrument flight procedures, we do a actual flight inspection in the aircraft with a Garmin flight inspection database. And then we also, like in the case of airport lighting, we have a letter of authority that allows us to certify the the runway and the airport for night IFR operations. And we can also have another letter of authority that allows us to do calibration and flight inspection on visual nav aids like PAPIs and such. And that's why sometimes you will see on an instrument flight procedure, it'll say NA at night, or it'll say VGSI not coincident, where they don't match. Next slide. So here's some terminology for you. You're probably familiar with PBN, or performance-based navigation. So whether you're flying this visually or you're flying this IFR or whatever you're doing in your aircraft that involves a flight management system, a database, all of that is performance-based navigation. And that's a fundamental shift from legacy navigation, where we flew between radio aids. Like when I first started flying in the 70s, a radio navigation aid like an ADF was considered something, great. In the modern era, all of this has now gone to a space-based system where we can now fly better, safer, closer to things with greater accuracy at different altitudes. But even better, it supports trajectory-based operations, which we'll see on subsequent slides. So you don't have to fly 20 miles downwind to fly into a 20-mile conga line to line up on a radio beam to get to a runway. Differential GPS is WAAS in the United States, also known as SBAS, or space-based augmentation. And we leverage that in designing these procedures. Guided visual, that's what you're using. It's a day-night VFR tool, and it keeps you clear of surfaces. RNP, that's a term meaning required navigation performance. That is what is in performance-based navigation. You have ANP, your actual navigation performance, and your RNP. Your RNP should always be less than your actual navigation performance. When your ANP grows to the point where it's equal to or greater than your required navigation performance, that means you're no longer navigating safely, and you should abandon whatever you're doing and fly in extraction. Lateral and vertical navigation, a three-dimensional path to the touchdown zone. And these procedures use RF segments, which is one of 35-ish AirInc 424 codes. So AirInc 424 codes that fly you in a straight line between waypoints, that's a track to fix or TF leg. A radius to fix is basically an arc between two waypoints. This map is pointing to Grand Prairie. And there's a shot of what that kind of looks like if you're lined up on the runway. If you go to the next slide. So I get this a lot. Airport, 1 to 2 o'clock, 7 miles. That's kind of what it looks like. I'm in the left seat. Airport's off my right shoulder somewhere. The guided visual really helps me figure out what my optimum turn point and descent would be. That's going to give me a stabilized trajectory-based approach to the runway. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what the expectation is. So air traffic, these are not instrument approaches. So air traffic is going to clear you for a visual approach. This is a tool to support you in flying that visual approach. They don't have a copy of this. They don't even know if it exists. That's why if you look at the waypoints, they're the first 3 letters of the airport and a number. It's not, oh, I'm going to fly to this waypoint and air traffic will clear me for that. They don't know. They're clearing you for visual. You can pull this up and use it to your advantage. It is not a substitute or something to be used in IFR IMC conditions. This is a visual maneuver when cleared for a visual approach. Use of RF segments need to be understood because you can't go directly to an RF leg. So I put a red X. You could see where that RF starts. You have to go to the waypoint or waypoints prior to the RF leg. If you try to go direct to an arc, it's going to fly straight through it. It will not capture it. Next slide, please. So I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Joey, here, and he's got really some great touch points to talk about how this all works in the avionics.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Yeah, so just putting it all together here, some of you may know Shannon Day. He had posted on his experience a few months ago flying Garmin Guided Visual into Scottsdale in his M2. I think he's in a 3 Plus now, recent delivery there. But yeah, he had a terrific experience there and has some details there. So we'll just go through that scenario that he experienced there. So just to help set this up a bit, you can see the picture there on the right as the kind of the bird's eye view of the landing, visual segment, or the extended threshold or extended center line there of runway 21 into Scottsdale, and you get peaks, 3,300 feet. You're coming in there from the north, just to the east of that, 3,800 feet. And so there's, makes it for a tricky approach in there. There is an approach into 2-1, though it's marked authorization required, and our avionics don't have the technology, INS sensors and things like this required to take advantage of that advanced, capability. But we are leveraging some of those same things and tools that Chris just mentioned, RF legs, et cetera, to help us out in some cases with these guided visual approaches to make these possible. So that's just kind of a bit of the background setup with the situation. And so this approach procedure there is on the right, and you can see, Garmin Guided Visual. It's not an instrument approach, but a guided visual rather is charted there on the right, and you can see the segments that connect all this. And that segment that you initially start with in this case just happens to be on the end of the star coming in from the north. It's the desert arrival coming in from the north there. So that's YOLO, and it picks up from YOLO and then helps thread the needle in and around to put you up on a straight final for runway 21 there into Scottsdale. And so the photo on the left is just a picture of the touchscreen controller in the M2 that Shannon Day was flying behind. He loaded it just like any other procedure you'd load. So, you've got options to load, of course, instrument approach procedures, our visual approaches, which just give you, prescriptive generated guidance into runway environment. But this will add the ability for you to load it into your FMS just as it's prescribed there. So it loads if there are any specific altitudes at each of the constraints, it'll load those. So you can see, it's got YOLO there at just above 6,000 feet. The next waypoint at Scottsdale 08 at 5,700 feet, et cetera, et cetera. So if those are published on the chart, it will include those in and pull those in, and they're coded in the database to pull into the FMS there. So this is a couple of images from our partnership with Flysto. If you guys are familiar with them on his exact track into this, so that photo there on the left shows how the guided visual just kind of helps thread right through and around, and just allows you to set up really nicely, configure the aircraft, and maintain a nice, stable, and smooth descent into runway 21. And then the photo on the right just is a nice 2D description of that flight path into the runway there. So just for another example, for those that have operated into Aspen, the chart on the left is an FAA published uh, roaring fork visual, and you can see it. You've got a lot of different visual cues. It's got Mount Scorpies, Capitol Peak, etc. Some water features and things like this for you to follow visually, but that's it. It's as Chris said, it's your Mach 1 eyeball, lining up these features with this chart to help give you some sort of guidance into the terminal environment, into the runway. So you can see Chris's team has put together the chart there on the right that helps code all of these into waypoints so that you can, load them again into your FMS and couple your automation to them, and it'll respect altitudes published at all of those, and just help you fly this procedure with a lot more accuracy than just using your eyeballs. And for this procedure, I just ran this in our simulator here, and this is just a photo. On the left there, you can see I'm in turning into a downwind effectively for the runway. And then on the right, you can see a picture of the MFD. And so that left pane is obviously you've got the moving map page, but below that, you've got, the procedures. It's respecting each of those constraints as I've got it coupled via VNav. And then as it makes that final turn using that radius to fix leg type that Chris described, it is capturing the equivalent of a glide path effectively, and continuing the aircraft down to the runway environment. So you're really just like Chris mentioned in that environment where you can see the outside the simulation environment there in the picture on the left. You're really just looking outside the aircraft. It helps alleviate that workload for you to be more aware of your surroundings, and just focus on configuring the aircraft and getting it in a nice stabilized condition. So that's just another example there. So today there's 31 approaches at 25 different airports. These are published on our website. So you can go to garmin.com/guided visuals to get, this list effectively to see where these are at. And then, we're interested in your feedback as well. So you can email me if you've got my contact information, or my team, cx@garmin.com. And if you have an airport, Chris and I want to hear about that, and we want to take a look at that to see if there's some opportunity. We want to continue to grow these airports that have difficult, challenging terrain, or like Chris mentioned, unique airspace concerns going into busy metroplexes like the Dallas area, as he mentioned with Grand Prairie as well. So these are just to tip our hand here just a bit. We are planning on bringing some new guided visuals into these airports in about a month or so in our cycle release. So you can see, we're continuing to make progress here. We'll continue to update this data set and database to expand those. So let's talk about how you buy it. So I'm just going to break this down for each of the specific models of citations, because it's a little bit unique for depending on which model you're coming at it from. So we'll start with the 3 Plus and the M2, and so the nuance here, and I get this is probably where I get the most questions, and one of the pre-submitted questions is really about your existing charting solution with Jeppesen charts. So at the top level, the Garmin Guided Visuals are exclusive to Garmin's own navigation database, and the charts are embedded in Garmin's flight chart product. But there are ways, and I'll talk about how we can work around that if your preference is, with Jeppesen charts. So if that's your preference in the 3 Plus and M2, Garmin's charts are not certified for that particular airframe. So your charting solution is going to be with Jeppesen. And if you wanted to consider switching to gain these access to these, you'll want to amend your current Jeppesen subscription to just a charting only subscription. And then you'll want to purchase navigation one pack from Garmin so that you'll get our Garmin navigation databases that include, it's a special version that includes these Garmin guided visuals. And so that's what gives you the ability to load guided visual into your FMS, just as pictured on the touchscreen controller for the M2 there in the example picture. And then what you'll do to look at the chart, so you won't have access to the chart on your flight displays, but you can use Chris's complimentary free Hughes iOS app to view all of these approach charts. So you can use that to help supplement the guided visual on your iPad device. So you can download that. As a matter of fact, now, if you're curious about these procedures and what they look like, you can preview all and take a look at all of these charted procedures today using Chris's and the Hughes team's complimentary app there. So let's talk about Mustang and earlier citation models that have the choice between Garmin's charts or Jeppesen charts. So if your preference is, you want to move over to Garmin's charts, you're able to do that, and the charts will display just like they would in the picture on the right. So you'll be able to show those. They'll be geo-referenced with your airplane symbology. If you're already a Garmin subscriber in your mid-cycle, you can contact me. I'll be happy to connect you with the support team, but you'll need to contact our support team. Ultimately, they'll be able to amend your subscription and work all that out to get you upgraded to the version with Garmin guided visuals in them. Now, if you are preferring Jeppesen charts, similar process to what we discussed with the 3 Plus and the M2. You're going to want to contact Jeppesen, let them know you'd like to amend your subscriptions to a Jep chart only subscription, and then you'll want to purchase a new subscription from Fly Garmin. It's a America's Guided one pack that doesn't include our charts, but includes our navigation database in there that has the guided visuals, and then you'll use the Hughes app to view the charts there as well. So I'll mention, so while you've got the view in the Hughes app, you're probably thinking, how come we don't have these in the Garmin Pilot app at this point? That is something we're working on, and we expect to have later this year to help make that a little bit more of a seamless experience. And we do plan to make those into Garmin's smart charts as well. So they'll be intelligent. They'll let you, add a transition fix, and it'll declutter all the other irrelevant fixes and information off the chart, just like what we're doing today there. So those are coming. So with that, that's what we've got this morning for you. Liz, I'll turn it over to you to see if we have any questions. I can also take a peek here to see what we've got.
Yeah, I know that you did answer already about the Jeppesen chart approaches, but could you kind of speak to the visual approach and the vertical guidance of the GTN 750 XI displayed on the Legacy 3-tube Honeywell EFIS? And I can paste this in the chat as well, so you can read the question I got.
No, I think I've got that, Liz. Yeah, thank you. So I think the question is with the earlier citation models that have some of the earlier factory EFIS systems in there where they've been retrofitted with our GTN navigators. And in those cases, so long as your aircraft is configured to leverage the approaches, the instrument approaches in those, so you get an indication or display of glide path or glide slope on your EFIS system from our GTN, then you would select and the approach would display just the same as that, effectively just like a GPS approach would from a GPS instrument approach procedure. So that's how that would work, Liz.
Okay, thank you. I think this is another one that I'm going to have you jump on. I was seeing if maybe I had one for Chris, and you may have already gone through this one with the plane types that you just went over, but which Garmin products will this work on and which one will it not work on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 3 Plus and the M2 with G3000, they're compatible there. The Mustang G1000 NXI, they're compatible there. And then the earlier citations with GTN or GTN XI, so both our earlier production GTN series as well as our latest production GTN XI series are compatible with RF leg types. Now, in those installations, there may be cases where they need to be configured on. So I will say we have learned that there, if the original installer didn't turn on the ability to display or the ability to leverage RF legs, that does need to be turned on, but it's possible for that to be done. So you may need to go to an installer to turn that on, but it's absolutely possible to get those displayed and functional on your GTN product line.
Okay. And then, Nick, I saw that you just asked a question. Do you want to come off mute and highlight it a little bit, or I can read it out loud for you?
Hi. No, just wondering. So we have a G1000 NXI Mustang. Kind of like the JEP approach charts. Can we use both? I didn't quite understand.
Yes. Yeah, Nick. Yeah, thanks for the question. So, let me back up a couple slides here to that specifically. So, if you prefer to leverage your existing JEP charts, that would be the content here. So, what you want to do is amend your subscription with Jeppesen to a charts only subscription, and then you'll want to purchase your navigation and accompanying data from Garmin via America's Guided Visuals One Pack. And then that'll allow you the ability to load the visual approaches into your FMS like we discussed. And you'll use the Hughes app to display the chart to get your charted information from.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Look forward to that. I will try it. Especially looking forward to Medford because that's always a tricky one from the south. And could I ask a more generic question about the current visual approaches? And
Sure.
maybe they're the same, but I've never quite figured out when to use vectors or straight in. Is one, and the second part of it is I think in both of those, when it defines a visual, 4 mile approach picks, I get altitudes that would put me very near the ground and aren't correct.
Okay. Yeah, Nick, we may need to take some of that offline for that latter part to discuss what you're seeing there. Because I'm not, that's not, doesn't sound like something that's normal behavior, but
Okay.
like I said, I think I saw this question as well. So let me just back up to your first question and just make sure everybody's understanding. And I did meant to highlight this, the difference between a Garmin guided visual and a visual approach that we've had available for some time, probably close to a decade now. Garmin's been offering visual approach capability, and so just to recap, there, most are familiar there, but that is a visual approach that the system calculates to basically any runway that we have published in our navigation database. So in that case, you don't need a specific approach published there. It'll leverage, so long as we have surveyed information from the runway, we can use that. What it does is it looks at the threshold crossing height of that particular runway and then will draw a 3-degree glide path out to, depending on your system, it can vary 3 or 4 miles, and it'll drop a waypoint there to give you a nice 3-degree glide path into that airport. So that's the visual approach product that we've had for, again, close to a decade. Now, what that does, again, since it automates that and generates it from our system, what it doesn't necessarily understand is terrain and obstacles. And there's, we prompt for some of that. We say, hey, make sure you're clear of terrain and obstacles. This is a visual approach. So the guided visual helps for those airports that we've picked out that have, challenges with terrain and obstacles in your environment. and will help give specific guidance in those cases that Chris and his team have done the work on to survey and to understand, how best to thread the needle through those more dynamic environments. So that's just kind of a bit of difference between those two. And then Nick, we can probably take your question too in terms of the straight in the vectors to final there too offline, if that's all right with you.
Oh, that's fine.
Yep, perfect.
David Natitsky, do you want to come off mute and ask your question, or I can just read it out loud?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Joey.
Yeah.
Thanks for this. I think it's I'm looking at the kind of thinking through the pros and cons and I'm a JEP user now. We've talked a little bit about, and I think if I understand what you've said is that the visual plates are not in the G3000, the approaches, but the plates aren't there. Are there plans for that? And I don't want to open a can of worms on this. We can take this offline if you want, but there's been talk about putting them, if it's going to happen, great. If it's not going to happen, can they go into documents? Is there something, no offense to having to pull my iPad out, but is there another way to access them, while you're in the plane? And then I guess, are there pros and cons on, of course, I know you'd love us to all switch over to Garmin charts, but if we've been on JEP for a while, are switching over and just doing JEP charts only, is there a list of what we get and what we don't get, and are they just about equal if we switch over and just do JEP charts?
Yeah, great questions, David. So yeah, let me start addressing the limitation today with the 3 Plus and the M2 not being able to display flight charts. So we are making some progress there on the earlier serial number G3000 systems before the next generation hardware platform. We have a service bulletin coming that's going to provide a path to allow Garmin's flight charts on those. We don't necessarily have that same path available yet for the next generation platform. That's, we're still collaborating with Textron there. So I don't have anything necessarily to report on that front. I can't remember which one you're in that way, but that's just kind of the status in any case between the two models or the two variants. So yeah, your second question regarding display of charts, there probably are creative ways we can put PDF versions into the document viewer. I can take that action offline to explore that here more internally to see what we can replicate on a bench. And then yeah, from a differences perspective, I can just say, I haven't necessarily done a one-to-one comparison between products, but we are looking at, we've got a team that's looking at all of the same sources from the navigation providers, all the ANSPs and the IAPs. So they're looking at all that and coding the data from the same, record or source information in most cases there. So anyways, I can speak to that. Just we're capturing the data in a similar manner. We got to do it in a similar manner. We've got a letter of authorization that directs us on how that's done, and we do it that way effectively. So I hope that helps a bit.
Yeah, for sure. And then I guess looking into the future, I assume that you're already looking into how this will integrate with Prime and what those integrations will be, obviously when it comes, to fruition.
Yeah, so like the CJ4,
Yeah.
is what you're thinking. Yeah. Yes, certainly. We want to talk about that. I don't know this particular status off the top of my head, but I will make a note to better understand that. I can follow up with you offline on that, Dave.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Great.
I saw that Jeff Gross asked a question. Jeff, do you want to come off mute and highlight it, or do you just want me to read it out for you?
No, thanks, Liz. Appreciate it. So it seems like the efforts in designing the guided visuals is to somewhat augment either where there are currently deficiencies with instrument approach procedures, or if there may be use cases where it would make more sense to possibly use visual. Like, just speaking for myself, for reference, I've got a CJ3 ProLine 21 with a GTN 725 installed, and I love using the 725 to provide supplemental reference information. If I'm flying an instrument approach in with ProLine 21, I've got it pulled up on the GTN as well. It's great to have there. I saw you had Milwaukee as an example with the runway 34. There's no instrument approach there, so that's an obvious example of, hey, that's a great place to use a visual approach there. But I'm struggling to understand the difference of, hey, going into Phoenix last week, Sky Harbor. You're in the conga line, it's busy. They're telling you it's going to be a visual to 8. You're begging for 7 right. You've got the ILS loaded up. You've got the RNAV loaded up, because you just know they're going to give you a fix that's on one of the two. Is that even a consideration where you're looking at putting a visual approach there? Because I couldn't imagine trying to jump single pilot from ILS to RNAV to, oh, now I'm going to fly the visual. So hopefully I give you some background of what I'm trying to ascertain, the development direction you're heading with these.
Yeah. And so Jeff, is your specific question as it relates to Sky Harbor specifically, or just in terms of how we're thinking about building?
Just in general, how you're thinking
Okay.
about where and when you're going to build these.
Yeah. Happy. Chris, are you, you want to take that? I'm happy to. I've got a thought there on how we're approaching that, but if you wanted to jump in here.
Just to understand, being familiar with Sky Harbor, so you're being told to expect 8. You really want to land on I'll call it the GA runway, which is 7 right. Go to Qatar or wherever you're navigating to. And your concern is having the right approach teed up to navigate visually.
That's one example. The case of Milwaukee makes perfect sense of RNAV. There's no RNAV 3.4 or ILS on 3.4 because of the O'Hare airspace south of there. Having a visual going in there is, hey, thank you for creating that. If I ever have an opportunity to use it, absolutely, that's a prime use case. Is that kind of the direction you're heading, where you see those gaps in instrument approach coverage, or are you also going to supplement them? And that's where I use the example for Phoenix. Yeah. I couldn't ever see myself supplementing going into Phoenix with something like this.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, Jeff, I think you've got it from my understanding. If I'm understanding you correctly, that like the Scottsdale example we just mentioned is another perfect example of what you just described with Milwaukee. There is a published instrument approach, but we're not capable of flying it. It's a marked authorization required. So there is no approach published for us to even use as some sort of visual guidance into that airport. So that also meets the definition. So we are looking at strategically looking at those types of airports to help in these situations. And Chris,
we're not looking to duplicate what's already there. So if there's already an instrument approach,
right,
that wouldn't be the sweet spot for this.
That's right.
If there's a charted visual procedure where you've got a gobbledygook like the Roaring Fork going into Aspen, we're able to code that and help you find those waypoints and manage the energy of the aircraft.
Thank you.
Yep.
I wanted to share my screen for just a second. Are you able to see my?
Yeah, I can see the Hughes app.
Okay. Somebody had asked. I wanted to show. So this is the Hughes app. If you go to the menu, you'll see Garmin Guided Visuals. It's about halfway down. And if you tap on that, it will take you to whatever guided visual you would want. And there's even a link in it where you can purchase a subscription. It'll take you to the Garmin page to do that. But like, here's one going into Van Nuys. It'll bring up both charts, and then you could tap and you can view it on a map. And then if you activate like the weather camera feature, with this device right here, you'll notice this camera pops up. I can tap on that and I could get a live weather camera image all in one spot. So the app is free. It has a lot of tools in it, different tools that have safety features. One of them, there's a VFR prediction tool where you could put in 2 waypoints, airports, lat longs. You could even draw your own route if you're going to go out and like do a test flight. And it will do a prediction model for you. Like there's Scottsdale, let's say from there, you're going to little airport up in Washington, hit update route. It'll draw a line and then it'll give you a prognosis. You can see most of this is green, just the end of it goes to marginal. Then there's a slider at the bottom and you can change the time, and now it's changing what your likelihood of having VFR is on that. The other thing is when you go to plan, go to brief, it'll tell you where you might encounter icing conditions, what mileage along your route you encounter, what kind of weather, moon illumination, a summary, and then it'll pull up all the weather cameras along your route of flight if you want to see what's going on. And then it'll also pull up NOTAMs along your route of flight. So there's a bunch of safety tools in here. If you're also a helicopter pilot, there's a link here to the U.S. helicopter safety team. And since I'm the chair of it, I'd be remiss to not plug it. If you have an interest in joining the USHST or participating in it, you can also do that from the Hughes app.
Wonderful, thank you. David, I don't think that's are you wanting to come off mute and ask a question, David McCartney, or is that you're just kind of highlighting that?
No, I didn't really have a question. I was just kind of highlighting it. But getting back to what Jeff was saying, can his software actually even support the guided visuals?
And the G1000 Mustang?
No, he was flying an old CJ3.
But I've got a GTN 725 in it.
Yeah. Jeff, do you see, are you flying approaches today using your 725?
I've got them just for backup. I'm generally using the autopilot off the Pro line, but I could couple the GTN to it for LNAV only.
And you get
understanding
you get vertical guidance?
You do.
Okay.
I'm told it's not authorized in the plane, but I've been given mixed signals. Maybe you know the answer, that it's possible to couple the vertical glide path to it.
Yeah, I mean, generally, yeah. If you're able to get vertical guidance and it's approved per your AFMS, then you're able to do that.
And my only other question was, and I don't know if you answered this already, Joey. Is there going to be a point in time where we just go to Garmin and not have to go to Garmin and Jeppesen?
If you want Garmin flight charts, then you can do that today.
Okay. I think that's what we've done. We just took delivery of the first Gen 2 CJ3.
Okay. Then so you are required to do JEP charts then in that airplane. So you will have to go to Jeppesen for those charts.
It's like an IT overload, though.
I understand.
I have Garmin Connect, Garmin Pilot, I have FlightStow, I have my insurance. Class A now gives me an app for checking my flights.
Yeah.
So it makes you don't have any time to fly because you're on your computer all the time. But thanks for everything you do. The guided visuals are amazing.
Yeah, appreciate that, David. Yeah, and your comments not lost on me. So we want to streamline that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Randy Sakura, you want to come off and ask your question?
Yeah, how you doing? So I got a question. Guided. I'm using the guided visuals, and I guess I wrote a note down here because I've had it where it's worked and it hasn't worked, at Heber, Hotel Charlie Romeo. And I guess one takeaway is what point do you have to go to on the chart in order for it to work? Because you're saying you have to go to the point before the circle, right? So you've got like a couple of points in here, and I just downloaded the Use app so I can look at it. But, Fugu, at 8,000, if you look at that chart, I'm like, okay, so I guess that's the point you have to go to, because if you pick the point too late, you're in that circle already. So it'll just fly right through it. Because I had that happen to me once. I'm like, oh, that didn't work. And then the other time it did. I'm like, oh, what did I do? What did I do differently? But I guess maybe that I chose something a little bit more upstream.
So in the case of Heber City to runway 4,
Oh, no, for 2-2. Oh, this is 4. Oh, okay. I'm talking about, I thought there was a guided visual on Garmin in the 2-2.
there is. There's
Okay,
one 4 and
I'm talking
2-2.
about two. I'm talking about 2-2.
So in 2-2, you would need to be at a straight segment before the RF turn, such as HCR 09
Okay, so or Fugu, one of
or
those.
FU because it's further away. So
Yeah.
at least one waypoint prior to the turn. And the reason is the way the FMS works in any aircraft, it wouldn't matter if you were in a 787 or a CJ. It needs one segment prior to the turn, and that's how it calculates where it rolls in, what that turn point is. So when you tell it to go straight to like HCR 05,
Right.
it doesn't really know where the radius is gonna be. What you can't see that's behind the scenes is there's another waypoint that is the radius, and it's invisible to you. In fact, when we come up with waypoints in instrument procedures, we maintain a library of thousands of 5 LNCs. 5 LNCs are the 5-character waypoints that you're familiar with. And they come in 2 categories, either pronounceable or unpronounceable. Although I, as a pilot, struggle with some of the ones that are pronounceable. But in the unpronounceables, we use those oftentimes for RF center fixes because you don't see them. So you don't need to be able to pronounce it. So in order
So,
to figure
so
out
you're
that turn
saying,
radius, you'd have to be navigating from the waypoint prior.
okay, so you're saying there's actually an HCR 4.5, but it's not there.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so if we pick HCR09 or Fugu, because generally coming in there, you'll fly the alpha approach, and then I'll switch it to the visual depending on who's there. What you don't see in this picture is past, HCR 04, there's a giant mountain. So you kind of have to make that left turn. But this is very helpful. Like I said, I tried it and it worked great. And then I tried it again and it didn't work. And I think that's why. I think I chose something that wasn't upstream enough before I activated it.
But Chris or Joey, I have a question following up on Randy's conversation there. So I know in other avionics package I've flown, you've been able to intercept a radial before a waypoint. So for example, if I'm getting vectored by air traffic control and they drive me past Fugu and past HCR 09, so I'm somewhere between 09 and 05, is there a way to intercept that 190 radial so you're set up correctly on HCR 05 to still be able to fly it?
I'm going to
Because I
say
heard you say you
no.
can't, because you can't go direct to HCR 05, you said, correct?
Correct. In fact, I'll share my screen again just so everybody can view the chart. So everybody see my mouse moving on the chart?
Yes.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying. You could be on a heading and you could have GPS armed and thinking it would capture. And I'm going to say I've not experimented with this in different navigators to tell you definitively like it will capture or won't capture. But even if it does, I'm still concerned about its sequencing correctly at HCR05. So if I was instructing, I would like your minimum waypoint intercept has got to be here at HCR09 or previous or prior, not south of this.
Yeah, I mean that I just for feedback from a pilot flying visuals, you're getting off your instrument flight plan. You never know where they're going to let you go or where you might want to break out. At night, I try to stay with them as long as possible, but I mean, they're going to just be vectoring you all over God's green earth a lot of time, keeping you out of. And I mean, what just happened to Randy, I'd say probably is frequently going to happen. People are not going to be able to fly direct to Fugu or HCR09 and need to at some point be able to hop on that visual guided approach. And it's probably going to be past HCR09 in certain cases, which is probably what happened to Randy as he was going in.
What would be the reason if is ATC saying, oh, we're unable to accommodate you or you can't go to
that's common. Yeah. I mean, I love having guidance like this at night, if I didn't have an instrument approach set up. But I mean, it's inevitable. I almost always get different headings. I'd like to fly the whole instrument approach. They're not going to give it to you. So you're on a heading. It's like, okay, got the airport in sight. It's night though. I still want to, fly a downwind leg, intercept the instrument approach at some point. And I could see this right here if I'm flying into that airport. I'm going to end up in the same situation where at some point I want to just get direct to HCR05 so I can fly this guided visual in.
Well, there's just limitations in the avionics of how it will intercept this RF leg or arc.
Got it.
And it doesn't do the computation if you're at it. The
And
only
do you
other thing
recall
I could
what happened when you were
ask
flying?
is if you tell air traffic, hey, I'm unable, I'm not going to be stabilized. Will they give you a hold at Fug
Right.
until they can, clear for the visual? And you could set up a holding pattern at Fug and wait until they clear you for the visual and then just depart Fug.
Does air traffic control have these waypoints in their system?
They don't have these, but they have Fug. If you see a real waypoint, a real 5LNC, that's a waypoint where we tied it in so you and they would know where you were. These that have the airport's identifier, HCR for the 3 letters of Heber Valley with a number, they do not have those. But Fug they would have.
Awesome. Jonathan Bailey, I know that you asked a question. Did you want me to read it out loud or did you want to come off mute and
Oh, yeah, I know we're running out of time. It's a bit of a loaded question, or I kind of know the answer, but I thought it's fun to talk about. We've had a number of seminars, meetings with NetJets over the years, just talking about safety in general, and I think they were kind of one of the leaders in implementing guided visual approaches. They had some scary data about, nighttime visuals into Henderson from the east. We've all heard about, Truckee, which is close to my home base, coming in from the south on the visual or from the southwest over the lake. And they have shown us. So, Chris, you may have worked with them and helping to build some of their visual approaches. I think that was done before anyone else was doing it. I don't know. Talk about it. It was a neat learning for us about what they had done and how their data improved.
Well, I can't speak for NetJets, but that yes, they are a customer and we have built out a network for them.
And things got better?
They're happy.
All right. Well, they showed us some charts, their FOQA data before and after the visuals were available, for instance, Truckee, and it was remarkable. They were getting a lot of terrain alerts, and so I guess I'm promoting this because these are some tough airports and situations, and there've been accidents, certainly Truckee, for instance. So this is a great product.
Yeah. So NetJets. And also for the airlines as well. It is. And as someone who flies single pilot a lot, I appreciate the workload that it provides by use of the autopilot and letting me look outside more than trying to fly the airplane, manage the energy, and then also looking for traffic and other things. I think it's an amazing tool. Our only caution always is don't misuse it. Like don't go into Heber City at night IFR and fly the guided visual.
Right.
That's not what it's intended for. And my fear is if that becomes a thing and people make poor choices, the FAA will come along and say, "Oh, we can't do this anymore," and it'll ruin it.
Thank you.
But the airlines have embraced this, going back to that notice that we created, and we essentially carpet bombed all these different locations that had FOQA data that supported an RVFP or a guided visual. In fact, we just built a guided visual. They were doing runway construction in Rockford, and UPS called us up and said, "Hey, we need a guided visual for the airport in Rockford." And we did that, along with recommissioning their PAPIs when the construction was done. And we're doing the same thing right now in San Bernardino. We're just yesterday we shipped a guided visual for coding to runway 24 in San Bernardino, where they're going to have a displaced threshold for about 3 months. So it's huge. And to be quite honest, as someone who flies a fair amount of Cat 3 Land 3 approaches, you won't find any of those to be unstable. But if you give somebody a visual to LaGuardia to 3-1, particularly at night, something trajectory based, even though it's, ceiling visibility is not a factor, that's where these unstabilized approaches really manifest, is having someone try to turn, descend, find the runway, urban and cultural lighting, or winds. Strong winds can be very challenging, as you know, trying to figure out where you undershoot or overshoot on the turn.
And are you finding that approach control is becoming more and more familiar with these, where they are being used?
Again, I can't speak for them, but what I will tell you is when they see you on the scope, and what they'll notice is when they clear for the visual that you're flying the same track repeatedly and you're not giving them any problems, they do notice that. So their assumption is that you've got something that you're using.
Okay. Thank you, Jonathan. I know that we are at the top of our hour. So Joey and Chris, do you guys have time for one more question, or do we need to head out?
I'm here to support the group.
I got time.
Dennis, did you want to come off mute and ask your question, or do you want me to read it out loud for you? Wonderful. So Dennis asked, can you activate the leg between HCR 05 and 09?
Let me look.
I didn't really hear the question except HCR 05 and 09.
Yep. Can you activate the leg between HCR 05 and 09?
I think he means like in the navigator, activate the leg in the Garmin and be in like heading mode and hit the approach button and capture the leg inbound.
If you prior to HCR 09, but not after that. But that's probably a better Joey question.
Yeah, and I need to run that in the sim. I don't have a good answer, but I'm happy to follow up with that.
Thank you, Joey. And then the last question that we had was from Rob.
Oh, hey, thanks, guys. One thing I noticed on here is if you're used to looking at instrument approaches and you're looking at the guided visuals now, we're used to looking at the final approach fix, right? And you kind of doing some things with your pacing based on that, with configuring and all, maybe a couple miles prior. It looks like most of the they're not called final approach fixes, right? But the last approach on the RNAV to 22, for example, HCR01 is like 1.2 miles. It looks like that's pretty much the standard, is about a mile, mile and a half or so from the edge of the runway, that last point, which is that visual, probably your closer visual descent point or something there.
So let me throw out another term here.
Yeah.
FROP, which is a real fan. I love acronyms, by the way. If you guys ever want to hang out, I'll teach you a whole new language. We could even argue and say the same thing with different acronyms. So FROP is the final rollout point. And in designing the procedure, so Heber City's got, as you would know, terrain challenges of where you could turn the aircraft. Again, this doesn't lend itself to being an instrument approach because you can't maintain the separation tolerances. You could do this visually, and that's how we get around it. But in terms of flyability, you need to have a final rollout point, or FROP, that's going to put you wings level in a stabilized trajectory to the runway. So 1.4 nautical miles from the end of the runway equates to about a 500-foot FROP. So they're not all going to be 1.2, but at 1.2, and you look at HCR01, that's a 3.7 degree flight path angle, wings level, and it's going to be slightly lower than the optimal, which is 500-foot FROP. On an instrument approach, you could go to 500-foot FROP. But since it's not an instrument approach, we're able to keep you away from the terrain and have you at a slightly lower FROP. In terms of configuration, you bring up a really good point. I remember the first one of these I built, and I had an FAA inspector in a 767 sim going into Newark. And there's almost a mythical curtain that one passes through when you look at RF legs. We're so used to thinking linearly when we look at the FAF, the final approach fix, or the PFAF, and we think, well, that's where I need to be configured on speed. And instead, you've got this arc. Well, you really need to be configured and on speed prior to that. And unless you've done this a few times, your brain kind of plays tricks on you. And it certainly did me when I started developing these. And it did to this FAA inspector. And he flew the arc, and he rolled out at the FROP, which just happened to be at 500 feet, clean at like 250 knots in a 7.6. And he said to me, kind of like, how did I get here? And he initially on the chart, at his request, we actually put a box that said, make sure you're on speed and configured by this waypoint. So I wouldn't go that far, and eventually that went away as people got used to RF legs. But I would be encouraging someone to be on speed and configured before they entered by HCR05 at the latest.
Yep.
And
all right, good, thanks.
You fly these things, I fly them into like Central America, where you're at night, you got terrain, and you're kind of like always going downhill. And as you know, you can't slow down and go down. So stabilization, you can become unstabilized on one of these if you don't slow down soon enough.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. One last observation, just for point, but again, looking at the in Heber Valley, the RNAV Golf runway 22. When you look at the approach itself on the top right, the name of it is the RNAV Golf. When you click on View on Map and you zoom in, it now says Guided Visual Golf runway 22. Is that standard? Is that it's just there's two different.
There's two different. So that's a very good point. So Hughes made both sets of charts, and they're to provide on-ship display on them. They're both different. You can't see that. The only attribute that you would see is this says guided visual, and the other one says RNAV-G. And the RNAV-G is to match what's in the database. And it can't, there was a limitation as to the number of letters that could be used. So on the chart that you have in the Hughes app, we just spell it out.
Okay, got it. Does an
Maybe
RNAV
it's
G always mean a guided visual? Could there be an RNAV? Could there be a G designator that's an instrument approach?
No. No, that was purposely created that way.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I will tell you a little sneak peek. We've created some of these as departures that are coming, and that will probably be a different letter.
Okay. All right, good. Well, thank you guys. Thank you, Chris and Joey. Obviously, a lot of questions. I'm glad we left time for all the questions, but great information here. As you guys know, this does get it gets kind of complicated or confusing with all the different apps, all the different approach plates, all the different options. So thanks for clarifying that. I'm sure you'll get lots more follow up with this, and we're going to post this on the forums. It'll be available for folks. So really appreciate the time and effort here. Liz, I'm going to go back to you now to close it out. Thanks.
That's all I have. So I really appreciate you all joining us. We have another webinar next week with Jetta Viva doing a citation market update. So thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you, Joey. Thank you, Chris.
Bye, everyone. Fly safe.
See you guys. See you, everybody.
Thanks.